We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, and it's Friday, January 16th, 2026. Thanks for coming along for the ride today on rumble.com/amradpod and on YouTube, the American Radicals Podcast. If you check us out over on X, at X America News, or at my own profile, at Real Steve Friend, that's awesome. Appreciate it. But hop over onto Rumble or YouTube. Way more fun there in the chat. And reminder, always, guys, just give us a thumbs up, like, subscribe, share, do all those things to help us expand out the brand. It is Friday. We got a lot to get to, and it ain't good. The legend holds that leaving the Constitutional Convention, Ben Franklin was asked by a woman, "Mr. Franklin, what sort of government have you given us?" And he said, "Madam, a republic, if you can keep it." Now, we don't know if that's true, but politicians really like to throw it out there. And if I'm assessing the way the current battlefield conditions are across the news spectrum and the way that our current government is comporting itself, we're not going to make it. So what are we going to talk about today? The Pentagon Papers, Part 2. We're boosting military spending, or at least hoping to, by $500 billion. There's no accountability to Congress for military use. And Planned Parenthood's going to be getting tens of millions of your dollars yet again. Supreme Court overruled the Fourth Amendment. Local police don't care about the First Amendment. And then a fake Office of Inspector General investigation into an FBI executive, which landed exactly 0 results. So, like I said, a lot to get to. It is a Friday where we're trying to catch up on everything. Thanks for being us here today. And let's get after it. This is not your mommy's show. Today is your daddy's show. I'm going to hurt lots of feelings. I will try to be merciful if I can, but the at Real Steve Friend mercy looks a little bit different than what most people's mercy looks like. My mercy looks more like this.
Am I not merciful? Am I not merciful?
Let's talk about the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, but I'm actually going to come out in defense of the Washington Post on this one. A couple days ago came out. Headline: FBI executes search warrant at Washington Post reporter's home. Was this journalist engaged in some sort of illegal activity? I mean, child pornography, bank fraud, murder for hire. There's a whole plethora of federal crimes out there. What, pray tell, drove the nation's premier self-anointed law enforcement agency to go to the home of a journalist and seize her laptop and other devices? Well, from the Washington Post, the FBI executed a search warrant Wednesday morning at a Washington Post reporter's home as part of an investigation into a government contractor, so not the Washington Post reporter, and that contractor was accused of illegally retaining classified government material. The reporter's name is Hannah Natanson. She was at her home. Federal agents searched her devices, seized her phone, her laptop, personal and work, and her Garmin watch. Washington Post also received a subpoena seeking information related to the same government contractor. So these are parties of interest. They are potentially witnesses. Are they maybe potentially co-conspirators in this ongoing FBI DOJ probe into a government contractor? The warrant, according to the Washington Post, said that law enforcement was investigating Aurelio Perez Lagones, a system administrator in Maryland who had a top secret security clearance and had been accused of accessing and taking home classified intelligence reports from a secure government facility. Now, it wasn't just the Washington Post there that, they're obviously biased in this case. It is, after all, their employee. You would expect them to come out maybe in some sort of defense and lay things out in the most optimal way possible. So let's give both sides a crack at it. Well, social media, because we're governed by just the best and brightest now, that's where you go to get the statements from the cabinet officials or the sub cabinet officials. So, first to the sub cabinet official, Kash Patel, director of the FBI, when he's not going to national anthem events with his girlfriend or buying new BMWs on your taxpayer dollar, he issued this statement. This morning, the FBI and partners executed a search warrant of an individual at the Washington Post who was found to allegedly be obtaining and reporting classified sensitive military information from a government contractor, endangering our war fighters and compromising America's national security. Wow, national security. That pesky First Amendment. That be damned. But Kash Patel has to answer to other people. So who's his boss? Attorney General Pam Bondi, who also took to social media to issue her own statement this past week at the request of the Department of War. The Department of Justice and FBI executed a search warrant at the home of a Washington Post journalist who was obtaining and reporting classified and illegally leaked information from a Pentagon contractor. Well, Attorney General Bondi, or do we refer to you as General? I don't know, and I don't care. The uptalking and the constant Fox News appearances, I respect you little to none. I guess you were absent the day they taught law at law school, because apparently we've forgotten that there's this pesky, dusty old document which has certain components to it that include a First Amendment, which protects the people's right to a free and fair press. Now, are you just a constitutional idealist, Steve? You have to exist in the real world. There's no precedent for this. This is, after all, national security. They're endangering the lives of our troops. Do you want the terrorists to win? You can throw all of those bumper stickers at me. I don't care. In fact, I'm sitting on pretty comfortable ground because there is a precedent for this. And it's a precedent that we've discussed before on the American Radicals podcast, way back. I think it's probably been a year and a half, 2 years. There was this case called the Pentagon Papers. So for those who don't remember, here's a refresher. There was this thing that went on back in the 60s and 70s called the Vietnam War, and it was going kind of poorly. And the executive branch did an assessment and a study and determined that it was really going very poorly. And they did not want that information to get out. So there was an individual who worked for, at the time, the Department of Defense. His name was Daniel Ellsberg. And he tried to bring these Pentagon papers to the National Security Advisor, to the president, and to various senators who just weren't interested in it. So he had a reasonable concern about the war effort. He was kind of against the war effort at that point, and he's entitled to that opinion. And he finally took it to the New York Times. And that spun up an entire Supreme Court case, New York Times Company versus United States. And in a 6-3 landmark decision, it made it possible for the New York Times and Washington Post to publish without risk of government censorship or punishment. And there was this concept. If you've seen The Big Lebowski, maybe you kind of don't really know what it means. It's a comedic line. Prior restraint. What does prior restraint mean? It means that a judge, the judicial branch, can stop you from publishing something because it risks public safety. Now, the Supreme Court in the Pentagon Papers case, New York Times versus United States of America, determined that prior restraint did not apply. And in fact, the reason we have a First Amendment, the reason that the First Amendment is so important is because the press, which in this case, in the age of digital, social media, everyone is a member of the press. You don't need specific credentials. Just ask Steve Baker, who went out as a citizen journalist. Ask anybody who's out there with an iPhone, who's reporting on a riot somewhere, some sort of misappropriation of assets that's going on in Minnesota right now from Somali immigrants, or malfeasance in the hands of the government. Anything. Any American has the ability to do that. Prior restraint needn't apply, and I don't give a crap about national security from Pam Bondi or Kash Patel. There's precedent for this. And you know what? Do better, government, because otherwise we're not going to make it. You know this particular journalist over at the Washington Post? What's her name again? Was it Hannah Nathanson? I don't think Hannah and I would probably agree on very much. She does, after all, work for the Washington Post, and it's a communist rag. You know, she's been able to cultivate over 1,000 government sources because there's so many insiders who are unhappy with the Trump administration because they're leftists, they're communists, and he's mean, orange, and literally Hitler. Do better. Where is the total personnel warfare? Why aren't you vetting people with security clearances? It's supposed to be constant, ongoing vetting going on. If people aren't trustworthy, then they should have their security clearances removed, suspended, revoked. But you're not doing that. Instead, you're going after the press, which in this country, a republic, if we can keep it, is supposed to be free and unfettered and unrestricted. We're not going to make it, folks. And I don't care if it's your team in charge or not. If you're on team DOJ, on team FBI, because we got to protect the troops, we got to save America from the terrorists, then you're not on team truth. You're not on team America in spirit. The spirit of the republic that came out of a constitutional convention almost 250 years ago. You're not on that team. You're just waving pom-poms because your guy is in charge. All right. Got pretty fired up about that one because I am sort of like an ACLU attorney from the 90s, I think. I don't have a law degree, but then again, I think a lot of people at the ACLU now don't, and they're going to come in later today. But I want to stay on another story from the Washington Post. It's from the editorial board, which is extremely pro-military right now, or at least pro-spending on the military. So without further ado, let's bring this one up from the Washington Post. Democracy dying in darkness. Peace through strength isn't cheap. Now, this is a reference to Donald Trump's attempt right now to enhance our military's budget by $500 billion. That's 500 billion with a B. President Donald Trump recently announced that he would request $1.5 trillion defense budget for 2027. That's a 50% annual increase. Projects such as revamping the Navy's fleet will take years of sustained funding, so it's not just a one-time influx. It'll just be the new baseline that will go through every single year on nauseam until our currency collapses, because $500 billion is more money than we take in from tariffs for the entire year. I was under the impression in this republic, this constitutional republic that elected by a mandate, popularly and through the Electoral College, Donald Trump to become chief executive, head of the executive branch, the president of the United States, the commander in chief, on a promise of a couple of things. One, we're going to be not getting into any more wars. Why would we need an extra $500 billion? Oh, and we're going to fund the entire government on tariffs. The IRS, that's going away. Income tax, we don't need it anymore. But the numbers just don't bear themselves out. We're going to bring in about $300 billion, perhaps $400 billion from tariffs in a fiscal year. The president wants to increase the Department of War's budget by more than that. That's one department in the executive branch. He wants to increase it by $500 billion. Peace through strength, Steve. Peace through strength. You know, we have to project that strength so nobody wants to pick a fight with us. Maybe, but I think we can look through history, very much like we did with the Pentagon Papers, to say there is a cautionary tale here. If you want to maintain a constitutional republic with a civilian-led military, you don't want to let the military-industrial complex creep in, right? I mean, but what do I know? I'm just a former hobbyist, now professional podcaster here on the American Radicals podcast. I mean, I'll defer to maybe a prior chief executive, a prior general on his perspective, one Dwight Eisenhower, on the cautionary tale of allowing a military-industrial complex to work its way in, worm its way in to our system.
States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry state.
Well, it sounds kind of profound coming from former President Dwight Eisenhower, who was head of the military. That's how he ascended to political prominence to begin with. I like Ike. That's how Dwight Eisenhower rose to fame. Now, he's not just speaking out of nowhere. I mean, he comes from a system of experience, but we also have history. We have that, the GOAT, right? The original president of the United States, George Washington, referred to Ben Franklin, Dwight Eisenhower. Let's pull up old George. George said, quote, "Those overgrown military establishments which, under any form of government, are inauspicious to liberty and which are to be regarded as particularly hostile to republican liberty." We don't want standing armies at that point. We don't want a military industrial complex. That was what the caution was about. That's what Dwight Eisenhower was referring to, because when you have a standing military, you have an industry attached to it. War becomes very profitable. You'll have lobbyists that come in from Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and Boeing saying, "Oh, we just love America. We have to be worried about national security. Why don't we kick in a shekel or two to your campaign there, Senator? Or do you want to maybe attain even higher office, your presidential campaign?" As long as we have the assurances that when push comes to shove and the budget process is coming around, the appropriations considerations go down, you want to make sure that you increase that defense budget. Don't depend on those oceans to protect the American people. In fact, don't depend on a national security structure at all that involves fiscal responsibility. Was it Robert Gates? Or is Donald Rumsfeld? It was one of those guys who used to be in charge of the Department of Defense before it became Department of War that said that our fiscal irresponsibility was actually the greatest threat to national security. The government printing and spending money, borrowing money, and taking your dollars that are worth less and worth less because as more money enters the system, it's more dollars chasing fewer goods, and that's called inflation, until the dollars become worth less and worth less until they become worthless. That is kind of a threat to national security. But what are we talking about here? It's just chump change. $500 billion, when our history tells us that we don't want to build up that infrastructure because it encourages us to use it. You have cable news hosts going out there on a nightly basis right now saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. We need to do this military flex. Otherwise, no one's going to take us seriously out there. What we're going to wind up doing is spending more blood and treasure that we can ill afford to do part with, because we have to flex. We have to show the world just how strong we are in this constitutional republic, which theoretically has a checks and balances, a system of checks and balances between three co-equal branches of government, one of which is not the executive. The actual Article 1 powers are vested in a legislature. Going back to third grade civics, they're the group that actually passes the laws. They're the ones that have the power of the purse strings. They're also the ones that are supposed to declare war, if memory serves, but it's been a decade or two, so maybe we should refresh our memory on that one. Let's go over to NPR to just find out just how we're not going to make it, because our legislature just doesn't do its damn job anymore. So from NPR, headline: Senate Republicans block Venezuela war powers resolution. All these guys who are just stalwarts of conservatism, constitutional conservative, they just folded like cardboard boxes in a rainstorm when it came to actually doing the job that they swore an oath to do. They couldn't be bothered. So Republicans in the Senate blocked a war powers resolution that would have required President Trump to secure authorization from Congress before launching any further military operations in Venezuela. Like the Constitution requires the president to get a declaration of war. We don't do that anymore. It's just too dang hard. The resolution was blocked with the support of Josh Hawley from Missouri and Todd Young from Indiana, 2 of the 5 Republicans who had sided earlier with Democrats to actually make the president come forward and request war. Now, look, I'm not going to defend Democrats here. They're not doing it for any other reason than to oppose the president, who they don't like because he's a member of the opposing party, even though Donald Trump is closer to a Democrat from the 90s than an actual conservative. And he is mean, orange, and literally Hitler. So they have to oppose him just on those grounds alone. If they were to go in favor of a Donald Trump initiative, a Democrat would be voted out of office. They'd lose it in the primaries. But we have these Republicans who are supposed to be principled, right? You got to pull the lever for the GOP. That's how you save America. Re-electing Lindsey Graham or Mike Johnson, or in this case, Josh Hawley, or this other backbencher from Indiana, who, at least for a moment, said they were going to hold the line. But why didn't they, after all? Well, according to these guys, Josh Hawley said that his concerns about U.S. intervention in Venezuela had been alleviated by speaking with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And Young, this guy from Indiana, Todd Young, he said that he changed his mind after receiving assurance from another senior official within the White House that, quote, there is no American troops in Venezuela. We pinky promise. So senators just voted away their constitutional obligation to be the guys who declare war. That's what the pesky, dusty document requires, but they can't be bothered doing that. Franklin left that constitutional convention. Madam, a republic, if you can keep it. How do we have a republic if the people we elect don't actually do the damn job? Article 1, Section 8. Sorry to nerd out, but sorry, not sorry. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11. The Congress shall have power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water. That's it. That was spelled out very specifically. The finite amount of responsibilities that we, as a social compact, require of our government. We not only require those actions, but we require that they come from the correct place. The Supreme Court can't declare war. The President of the United States can't declare war, and yet he seems to. And it doesn't matter if it's this president or the last president or the president before that. My entire life, the president is just unilaterally gone to war. It's not allowed. It's not supposed to be allowed. You're supposed to go and request a declaration of war from the legislature because it forces you to actually make the case and not make a unilateral decision for other reasons that we're not privy to. Spell it out, make the case. There's not an imminent threat from Venezuela right now. This is a perfect, tailor-made example of how you could actually go about it. There's not an imminent threat. There's no national security concern here from Venezuela. Seriously? Really? They have no capability of striking us at any time. Go through the process like you're supposed to, or don't, because we're not going to make it as a constitutional republic, as a going concern. Now let's stay on the executive branch. More failures, or at least failing to hold on to the promises. And I alluded to the ACLU being a 90s attorney because I wouldn't be a member of the ACLU now, a member or an attorney, because they just represent the far left in this country, the far left that wants to kill as many babies as possible. And thanks to the Trump administration, they're going to have an influx of millions of dollars in order to do just that. So, headline. Lawsuit dismissed after Trump administration quietly restored tens of millions of dollars to Planned Parenthood. I thought we were the most pro-life administration in history. Guess not. The ACLU on Monday dropped its lawsuit against the Trump administration over tens of millions of dollars in Title X family planning funds that federal officials had withheld. Now, they were withheld like 9 or 10 months ago because the Trump administration said that these institutions like Planned Parenthood and others were violating civil liberties, civil rights laws, because they were hiring people based on diversity, equity, and inclusion. They were basically hoisting them by their own petard, saying, you guys want to claim to be all DEI. Well, guess what? You violated civil rights, so we're not going to give you government dollars. But U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro told the court in D.C. that, quote, the review is completed and all grants at issue for the plaintiff's members have been restored. So congratulations, America. Even though you voted on a mandate for the most pro-life president, the only one to attend the March for Life that I can remember, if ever. Well, we're sending tens of millions of dollars now back out to Planned Parenthood so they could just murder more babies. I guess integrity and principle is only a problem if you got it. Speaking of having no integrity and no principles, let's go to our next story from the Daily Caller. We'll ping pong back and forth between the legislature and the executive, and now back to the legislature. This one is about 81 Republicans who are voting to send more money to a group that does not like free speech. From the Daily Caller. 81 Republicans vote with Democrats to fund deep state slush fund that targeted conservatives. Well, I thought the Republicans were conservative. Maybe the closer to reality statement is that the conservatives who vote Republican are the real rhinos. They're the real Republicans in name only. They're the Richard Gere and an officer and a gentleman who are screaming at the ballot box, I have nowhere else to go. So they pull the lever begrudgingly. I think that's probably the most accurate political assessment that I can provide for people who are truly small government, constitutionally minded, and want to believe in small r republicanism. But let's go to this piece from the Daily Caller. Lawmakers voted 127 to 291, so it was a vote that went the other way, to give $315 billion to the State Department's democracy promotion programs that it has. So the democracy promotion programs is a diplomatic plan to spend your money in other countries to do democracy. But what it winds up doing is it goes to buddies of insiders in the government, and regardless of what party they are, they really like some pretty nasty organizations. And one of them was this NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, NED. Now, 6 years ago, NED financially supported the Global Disinformation Index, and that was a group that came out of the United Kingdom and identified some risky news outlets who should be suppressed online. And that included American Spectator, Newsmax, Federalist, American Conservative, One America News, The Blaze, Daily Wire, Real Clear Politics, which brings both sides in, I guess, Reason, a libertarian group, so that's obviously bad, and the New York Post, which I don't know, is probably the most conservative news outlet out of New York City, which is like being the skinniest kid at fat camp, the tallest midget, the smartest retard. That level of slight conservative bent, that had to be suppressed. And that group got the backing of the National Endowment for the Democracy, which, thanks to your elected officials, both Democrat and Republican, is going to get over $300 billion shoveled out towards it of your money so it can continue going towards those things, because the First Amendment, that's kind of a problem. And the First Amendment's definitely a problem. But you know what else is for your government? The Fourth Amendment. Supreme Court just came out with a decision here, and the case is called Case versus Montana. Guy here, his name is William Case. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this one because apparently in a unanimous decision, our Supreme Court of the United States, which I was reliably informed is heavily conservative at this point, with stalwarts of constitutionalism like Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Barrett and John Roberts, they voted with Kagan and Jackson, Sotomayor, Neil Gorsuch, who probably reads Reason.com because he's kind of libertarian. He voted, all of them, all 9, against the Fourth Amendment. So I'll throw up the actual decision. It was written by, I believe, was it Kagan who wrote it? Yeah, it was Kagan, because Sotomayor is not really literate. But they wanted to show that they were bipartisan on this one. The Supreme Court of the United States, decision of Case versus Montana. So as background here, this case began in 2021 when William Case told his ex-girlfriend that he was going to kill himself and he would shoot any police officers who came in. So you get kind of a threat of a suicide by cop scenario. And the ex-girlfriend called 911, said, you got to go do what's called a welfare check. That happens all the time. Hey, look, I'm concerned. My family member, my friend, my neighbor, they're saying some disturbing things. Would you be able to go over there? Shoot, I haven't seen my neighbor for a couple of days. She's an elderly woman. I'm concerned maybe she took a fall. Maybe she just woke up dead. Those are the sorts of things that local police deal with quite a bit. Now you're a little bit limited because you go up and knock on the door and nobody answers. You can't just boot the door. You're supposed to have probable cause to enter a premises or some exigent circumstance. There was a case that's sort of precedent setting where police responded to an area, could see inside the window that people were fighting on the inside. All right, well, there's a risk to the public safety. There's an exigency. You can boot the door to go in and break up the fight. That's been allowed for a long time by the Supreme Court. But this is a little bit different. This is a guy saying, I'm going to kill myself, and if the cops come in, I'm going to kill the cops. And then the cops went. So they might have actually been endangering themselves. So a little bit more details out of this case. Again, Case versus Montana. William Case is the plaintiff. Case did not answer the door when the police officers knocked, and they looked through an open window. Did they see fighting going on? Did they see him cutting himself? What did they see? They saw empty beer cans, an empty handgun holster, which proves nothing, and they thought was a suicide note. It was a piece of paper, but they said that we figured it was a suicide note, not just a receipt from his most recent trip to Walmart. The police officers, after 40 minutes, decided to just boot the door and go inside. Case was hiding in a closet in a house by himself, so not the most mentally stable individual, and he was holding a black object that the officers thought was a gun, and they shot him. And then they searched, and they found a handgun in a laundry hamper and wound up arresting him. William Case asked at trial to exclude the evidence because they didn't have a warrant to enter his house. They didn't have a warrant to search for anything. And he contended that if police officers enter a home without a warrant to provide emergency assistance, they must have probable cause to believe someone is in urgent need of help. On Wednesday, the Supreme Court disagreed. 9-0, folks. 9-0. The Fourth Amendment doesn't matter. They actually equated it with seeing a fight that was going on with, hey, we got a tip, unverified, of course. That gives us enough reason to just go into your house. That couldn't possibly be something that's ripe for abuse. Not at all. Not at all. I mean, we're just good public servants. If somebody calls and says, I think somebody at some point said something dangerous, then that's enough. We can just go in the house. And if we find anything, we can use it to charge you with a crime that we weren't intending to be there to investigate to begin with. Now, come on, Steve. That's extreme. Maybe this was kind of a little bit on the edge here, but certainly it would never be ripe for abuse. I mean, can you imagine if police officers went to somebody's house because they said something exercising their First Amendment right, and they said, that could be a risk to the safety, but you're just making that up. Right? That couldn't possibly have just happened.
You're here to investigate a statement that I allegedly made on Facebook.
We're not 100% it's you. We got to see you first.
If I admit that it's me or not, what does that mean?
Ma'am, you're not going to jail. We're just here to have a conversation.
I'm not going to jail. Wonderful. Excuse me. Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm Raquel Pacheco.
Hi, nice to meet you. Detective Gino.
Nice to meet you. I am recording this.
You can
Just
record,
for the record.
You can record all you want.
How can I help you?
We're just, let me see. We're going to show you a picture to make sure it's you. We're not sure.
Okay.
Is that your account?
I refuse to answer questions without my lawyer present. So I really don't know how to answer that question
Okay,
either
well,
way.
like I said, you're not
This
going to
is freedom
jail.
of speech. This is America, right?
And
A veteran.
And I agree with you 100%.
Okay.
We're
All right.
just trying to see if it's you, because if we're not talking to the right person, we want to go see who the right person
Okay,
is.
how can I help you?
So pretty much it's just a statement that was made as far as,
Verbatim, it says the guy who consistently calls for the death of all Palestinians tried to shut down a theater for showing a movie that hurt his feelings and refuses to stand up for the LGBTQ community in any way. Even leaves the room when they vote and on related matters. Wants you to know that you are all welcome. Clown face, clown face, clown face. 3 days ago.
You don't know if it was you?
I'm not going to answer whether that's me or
Good for you. And that woman's a communist. Here's the background of this case. This comes out of Miami Beach. The woman who answered the door there, her name is Raquel Pacheco. She's run for the Miami Beach City Council. She's run for the Florida Senate. She's a leftist. And apparently she went onto Facebook and replied to a statement that the mayor of Miami Beach put out there. He said, Miami Beach is very welcoming. He's the mayor. He's trying to hype up his local community. And she doesn't like the mayor because he's a Republican. So her statement is that, what was it? Her comment criticized his position and action, saying that he consistently calls for the death of Palestinians, tried to shut down a theater for showing a movie that hurt his feelings, and refuses to stand up for the LGBTQ Rainbow Kamikaze community in any way. That was her statement. The police department said it assessed the post as out of an abundance of caution for any potential safety implications. What did I just cover? The Supreme Court of the United States, one of the co-equal branches of the government, said that police have an abundance of caution for safety can boot your door. Now, these guys just knocked on her door to intimidate her for perfectly First Amendment protected activity that wasn't anywhere close to a call to violence or a threat, a true threat. It's just her criticizing the mayor. But those police were really worried about safety. They could boot her door and walk in, according to the Supreme Court right now. The Miami Beach mayor, for his part, his name is Stephen Miner. He said that the police believed the Facebook comment contained inflammatory and false language. False language is otherwise known as free speech. And that warranted a follow-up. He said the officers acted to assess any potential threats and ensure public safety. And now, because of a 9-0 unanimous decision from your Supreme Court, which has 2/3 of it appointed by Republican presidents who are theoretically small government conservatives who are really interested in our constitutional republic, not like those horrible, terrible, god-awful Democrat communists who want total government. Thanks to that Supreme Court, Miami Beach Police Department next time should have just waited until this decision came down, and then they could have just kicked in Raquel's door and said, we're really concerned about safety issues. I've been pretty fired up today, and I started out with the FBI and the Pentagon Papers. So as long as we're doing a not going to make it type of show, let's close the loop and go back to the FBI for our final story today on the American Radicals podcast. And I want to go to FBI story, but it actually comes from the Office of the Inspector General for the Department of Justice, which is the internal watchdog. It's a government apparatus that investigates the government and ultimately always decides that the government didn't do anything wrong. And if they did, it's too late to do anything about it. So let's just move along here. Nothing to see, folks. Now, you as an American citizen are free to go check this out anytime you want. Just type into the Google Office of Inspector General, Department of Justice, and you can get the reports that they issue, which don't come out in great abundance because it's government work after all. They're not going to really be killing it. They're not going to investigate anything quickly because the winner of the pie eating contest gets another pie. You finish up one investigation, that just means you're going to have to do more. So they really draw these out. But every once in a while, I like to poke in there to see what's going on. If there's anything about my ex-girlfriend, and did find this one. It has been a minute or two. I think this was actually came out last September. So it's been several months I've looked at it, but let's put it up there. This is an investigatory summary of what the Inspector General just looked into about an assistant director at the FBI and some malfeasance at hand. The Inspector General investigation found that the then FBI assistant director wasted taxpayer funds and used their public office for their own private gain. This assistant director arranged for a 13-day international trip to 2 countries for the purpose of visiting 2 of the assistant directors, as they quoted, bucket list countries. The assistant director participated in 1 day of meetings in one country and 1 morning of meetings in another country, and spent 4 days at a beach resort at government expense between the meetings in those 2 countries. So an almost 2-week vacation paid for by the American taxpayer. Oh, and you should know that although the Inspector General has the ability to compel you to submit to an interview, they can only do that if you're an employee of the Department of Justice. So conveniently, this assistant director got the little, might bode well for you to retire. And he did. He retired, and ergo, the inspector general couldn't interview him, and they didn't make any criminal referrals for misappropriation of assets because this was just a good civic servant, just a public servant who swore an oath, did his 20 plus years, and is now collecting a government paycheck. We're not going to make it, folks. Not as long as we don't have a healthy respect for those dusty documents with the American people signed on to a social compact with the government, so that we could have a mission statement for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and ensure that our government exists to do a very finite amount of things to ensure that mission statement is a going concern. Those are our expectations. No more, no less. Just do the damn job. And if you operate outside of that, that's wholly unacceptable to us. If you're personally enriching yourself, if you're abusing your authority, if you're looking at the people as an opportunity to grow your power, not acceptable. We had a constitutional republic. In light of what I've been able to lay out today, I think being on fumes would be a charitable descriptor of where we are, which is a pretty dull prospect heading into your weekend. And this maybe will cheer you up. It also might put you down into a pretty dark hole, which is the subject of the palate cleanse, because if we were a robust constitutional republic, which was really like looking into arts and culture, and we were thriving intellectually, I mean, that would be pretty awesome. Or we could be where we currently are, and this one isn't current, it's like 20 years old, and we are having elephants race against midgets. So let's take it to the palate cleanse.
Ready, set, go! Here we go. Now for both teams, the elephant and the little people, overcoming the inertia is going to take a feat of amazing determination. Look at them strain. Look, you can only imagine how difficult it is for the little people. These jets are huge. But these people are, and there's the wheels. The wheels are moving. The elephant has also gotten his jet going. So now it's anybody's event. Look at this, folks. Look at these little people pull. This is just incredible. They are determined, and it is going to.
I don't even know what that was, but it made me laugh at least. Laugh so I don't cry in light of what we covered on today. All right, guys. Thanks as always for joining us here on the American Radicals podcast. Hope you have a great weekend. We'll be back with you on Monday, 12 o'clock Eastern time on YouTube, the American Radicals podcast, on Rumble, rumble.com/amradpod. And until then, have a great weekend.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.